Fight Club is intentionally full of ideological contradictions, mostly to do with Tyler and his following adopting many of the same flaws that they objected to in the system. For example, the car company the protagonist works for is happy to let people die in car crashes for profit, and Tyler is happy to cause a car crash just to make some sort of supposedly enlightening ideological statement.
We just had a near-life experience.
Rather than just go through the movie itself, I'm going to present to you in this video a documented historical example of what I call revolutionary psychosis. This document has lots of overlap with Tyler's Fight Club rules and his Project Mayhem uprising. It's called The Revolutionary Catechism by influential Russian revolutionary Sergei Nekhaev. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. And it's written in the late 1800s. The reason I've chosen this example in relation to Fight Club is because it's the most bluntly honest depiction of revolutionary insanity that I've ever read, or at least in terms of an influential manifesto. Sure, you get crazy manifestos written by lone lunatics, but that's different because those ones don't catch on. This one did. Most influential manifestos are peppered with distorting language and avoidance of anything that would overtly reveal the hypocrisy of the underlying ideology or the brutal actions required to fulfill the manifesto's aim. But this one is comparatively honest, and frankly it's quite a shocker. Before we get into the Fight Club comparisons though, the Revolutionary Catechism may have been written by a Russian, and it may have had massive influence on the communist Russian Revolution, but that context I believe is incidental. The ideas contained in Nekhaev's document I believe are present in many different violent revolutionary movements right across the ideological spectrum. Because at the end of the day, the ideologies may be different on the surface, but the actual tactics of destruction, intimidation and violence are far more similar in practice than those groups would like to publicly admit. So how does the document compare with Tyler's Fight Club? Well, Tyler's group only has 8 rules that are openly stated, with the first 2 being exactly the same.
The first rule of Fight Club is, you do not talk about Fight Club. The second rule of Fight Club is, you do not talk about Fight Club.
The remaining 6 rules are basically about the actual fistfights held in private venues, but once Fight Club moves out the basement and becomes Project Mayhem, the rules change and expand a lot. But we aren't given a list of update rules, just the occasional snippet.
In Project Mayhem, we have no names.
No,
Sir, the first rule of Project Mayhem is you do not ask.
Right.
Does that mean that you can't even ask what the rules of Project Mayhem are? There's a kind of unspoken list of extra conditions associated to Project Mayhem, and Sergei Nekhaev's manifesto does a good job of filling in the blanks, partially because it has 26 rules rather than 8. The first rule in the Revolutionary Catechism is, you do not talk about the Revolutionary Catechism. Joking, of course, yes? However, the secrecy element is there among his rules, as we'll see. So let's go for the full breakdown. The first rule is all about severing personal connections to people, possessions, or anything else that might distract from the manifesto author's desired revolution. It's also about the recruit disregarding themselves, accepting in advance that they will likely die in service of the cause. In parallel with this, Tyler has his recruits bring burial money. He's teaching them to accept their own deaths in advance. They also abandon their names, their family, their friends, their girlfriends, and they have no property. The second rule is a total disregard of all conventions in the existing social system. It assumes that absolutely everything in the existing system is bad. The Tyler's Project Mayhem isn't so explicit about this, but it does have its members leading double lives, only engaging with the existing system for the sake of infiltrating and destroying it. The third rule parallels Tyler's use of scientific knowledge for primarily destructive purposes.
Once the tallow hardens, you can skim off a layer of glycerin. If you were to add nitric acid, you got nitroglycerin.
But Nekhaev's manifesto also calls for a rejection of the, quote, mundane sciences, end quote. Why reject them? Maybe it's because at some point scientists might come out and say something that conflicts with his own revolutionary ideas, but he'll allow his members to cherry-pick aspects of science that serve his cause. The fourth rule is where the Revolutionary Catechism starts to get really sinister. It basically dispenses with all morality. Tyler's Project Mayhem isn't so overt about discarding morality, but it tellingly lacks any rules of ethical conduct. Rule 5 and the parallels are getting more specific. Here we find the class war element rich against poor, executives against workers, etc. Some reviewers talk about Fight Club's Project Mayhem group as equivalent to neo-Nazis, and in some ways it is, but Tyler's group definitely qualifies as a class struggle entity too.
We cook your meals. We haul your trash. We drive your ambulances. We guard you while you sleep. Do not fuck with us.
And then there's the manifesto statement about the revolutionary accustoming himself to torture. Now, this is something we definitely see in Tyler's group.
This is a chemical burn. It'll hurt more than you've ever been burned, and you will have a scar.
Rules 6 and 7 in the Revolutionary Catechism are the total dismissal of all forms of mercy, even toward oneself, and the dismissal of one's own impulses that might conflict with the revolution. Turning the recruit into a programmed robot, basically, who doesn't stray from the pre-programmed revolution mission for any reason. Tyler's group follows this line of thought too.
Like a monkey ready to be shot into space. Ready to sacrifice himself for the greater good.
They even chant the same slogans they've heard from their leader, hardwiring those slogans into the brain.
You are not your job. You're not how much money you have in the bank.
You are not your job. I was like...
You are the all-singing, all-dancing crap of the world.
Rules 8 and 9 in the manifesto are quite interesting. They are designed to prevent cooperating members of the revolution from mentally or emotionally bonding with each other in any way, except on the basis of their mutual commitment to the violent revolution. This is quite clever because it creates a situation whereby the recruit would be lonely and could only find bonding by carrying out their revolutionary duties. In other words, do as the revolutionary group leader says, or be a social reject within the ranks. Fight Club is a little bit different in this respect though. Members do seem to bond initially on the basis of their shared love of violence and pain resistance, and later they hang out together to celebrate their Project Mayhem victories, and undoubtedly there would be a pecking order based on successful commitment to the cause. Rules 10 and 11 are a contradiction of the supposedly capitalist aims of the manifesto. The revolutionary fighters themselves are referred to as capital, and their fates are discussed in terms of cost analysis and profit toward the revolution. In Fight Club we get the same contradiction. Tyler's group disregard the accountancy paperwork and bureaucracy of the offices that many of them previously worked in, and yet here they are running a revolution office in a similar manner, and treating themselves and each other as expendable units in a system where the profit is the revolution itself. Rule number 12 in the Catechism starts with the action not words philosophy that's also present in Tyler's Fight Club. It's vague about what deeds are required for members to prove themselves, but I assume this would involve the recruit committing some immoral act that a normal person wouldn't ever want to do, as proof of their revolutionary psychosis, I suppose. The second part of this rule is unworkable. No recruit can be accepted without the unanimous agreement of all members. Well, the larger the membership grows, the greater the chance that there will be a member somewhere who objects to a particular new recruit. Tyler's Fight Club is vague about this. He gives no rules about preventing certain people from joining or how to expel them if they don't go with the program. In reality, such rules, even for his underground boxing club, would be needed. But when it comes to Project Mayhem, there are strict entry rules, which involve the recruit basically starving themselves for 3 days. Though there's no mention if they would be provided with any water while they're on the porch. Number 13 is a rule pushing the recruit straight into a vengeful, murderous and hateful mentality. It literally states that the recruit should hate everyone and everything in the system and seek to destroy it all. And it involves a further severance from any compassion, morality or identification with other human beings. If there was a manifesto for serial killers, this rule would belong right in there. But this is also an area where Fight Club's Tyler Durden seems to keep the rules unwritten and to himself. But the proposed actions of Project Mayhem, the total immediate destruction of the economic system, would in reality lead to mass starvation, collapse of medical services, and countless other destructive effects on the population that Tyler claims he wants to free. Rule 14 in the manifesto, this gets straight into the split personality realm that Fight Club's protagonist experiences. It's all about leading a double life, being a private revolutionary and wearing a public mask of civility to deceive others and infiltrate every institution. And of course in Fight Club, infiltrating members are everywhere in society, even in the police.
You said if anyone ever interferes with Project Mayhem, even you, we gotta get his balls.
Rule 15 is about arranging mass executions of perceived enemies who ran the previous system, or in some perceived way supported it. Typically, in reality, this allows the overthrowers to murder whoever they please based on hatred and anger, so long as they can find a way of accusing the victim of supporting the old system, and that's not difficult to do if you know how to manipulate the language. Tyler avoids the topic of executing enemies, but torturing them through castration is an open plot point. Simply destroying the economic system wouldn't be enough anyway. Leaders of the old system would still have influence and would attempt to rebuild the old system quickly. So Tyler and his followers would have to engage in murderous warfare to stop them. He tries to mask over the fact that a lot of security personnel would die in the buildings that they destroy.
God damn it, since when is Project Mayhem about murder?
The buildings are empty. Security, maintenance, all our people.
Yeah, right, they're all our people. Every single security employee in all these buildings is a Project Mayhem operative. Is he even telling the truth there? Is he just making that up? If they're that good at infiltration, then why not just infiltrate all the banks and just shut them all down from within, with no violence? And when challenged, he lets it slip that murder is a required part of his plan.
You want to make an omelet, you gotta break some eggs.
Rule 16 contradicts Rule 13, which was the one about hating everything and everyone in the current social system. Now the author of the manifesto says that hatred shouldn't play a part in the executions. This is a form of denial common among criminals, creating intellectual justifications for violent acts that are actually driven by spiteful tunnel vision hatred. Tyler follows a similar line of thinking. He promotes destruction and violence as if they are necessities in service of a spiritual, intellectual or social cause, but a lot of it is just negative emotional thuggery. Incidentally, Rules 15 and 16 in this manifesto describe the highest tier of a perceived social hierarchy that needs to be destroyed. And so Rules 17 to 21, which we'll now get into, describe how the revolutionaries deal with other perceived enemies who occupy ascending tiers of the existing system, and the details are revealing of how dishonest the violent revolutionaries are. The second tier group, it says, should be spared for the time being, in other words, executed later, so that, quote, by a series of monstrous acts they may drive the people into inevitable revolt, end quote. That sounds to me like the revolutionaries want the establishment to become even more oppressive and immoral, so as to drive people emotionally into the arms of the revolutionaries. So they claim they want to free people from the monstrous system, but they also want the system to be more monstrous to justify the revolutionary seize of power. Slightly hypocritical. In Fight Club, Tyler's Project Mayhem carries out vandalous and destructive acts to shake the wasp's nest of the establishment. And the establishment response would then be pointed to as evidence that Project Mayhem is needed. And so when the cops have a conference talking about how to prevent Project Mayhem, the Fight Club members step in and threaten torture. This schizophrenic pattern would then be continued and escalated. Shake the establishment nest and then point to the establishment nest and say, look how oppressive they are. In Rule 18, the Revolutionary Catechism approach to the perceived third societal tier brings in more hypocrisy. This rule basically calls for the brutes in high positions to be partially recruited by the revolutionaries so that their wealth and privilege can be exploited. Yet the revolution is supposed to be against capitalism. The rule even talks about turning this group literally into slaves, yet the whole point of the revolution is supposedly to free the people from slavery. Amazing how these kinds of ideological doctrines often state the opposite of what they actually do in practice. Rule 19 describes the perceived fourth tier of the system. This target group is, quote, the ambitious office holders and liberals of various shades of opinion, end quote. What the author has described there is two very different sets of people. Ambitious office holders typically don't have much of an ideology other than personal profit and status. They are the type of people who would basically adopt whatever ideology is the currently dominant one among their bosses, whether it's Nazism or communism or something else entirely. All you have to do is persuade them that your group is the one that's going to be in charge for the future, and they will go along with it. But the rule also describes liberals of various shades of opinion, whoever they might be. In other words, people who are a bit more independent-minded, and so they often don't buy wholesale into an off-the-shelf ideology. Likely these people would be neither completely in favour of the existing system, nor advocating its total destruction. The rule says that these people should be falsely collaborated with and used to create disorder, but there's no detail about how to do this. In Fight Club, there are virtually no independent-minded people in the whole movie. Pretty much everyone is either totally part of the system or totally against it. We don't hear anyone criticising Tyler's philosophy or Project Mayhem except the protagonist, but he does such a weak intellectual job of criticising it that his objections barely register.
God damn it! God damn it! Fuck you! Fuck Fight Club! Fuck Marla! I am sick of all your shit!
This movie mostly presents a polarised worldview in which people are categorised as part of the system or against it. It's good for dramatics, and it's true to the psychosis of violent revolutions generally. You're either with us or you're with the enemy. Rule 20 describes a fifth category, and this one shows just how paranoid and desperate for cult-like power the violent revolutionaries are. It describes people who act as if they are part of the revolution but aren't good enough in the views of the revolution leaders for that membership. Quote, they must be constantly driven on to make compromising declarations. As a result, the majority of them will be destroyed, while a minority will become genuine revolutionaries, end quote. Compromising declarations, that's vague, isn't it? But I think it means compromising themselves in support of the violent revolution, increasing levels of self-sacrifice, degradation and personal suffering to maintain their credibility in the ranks. And when the rule says most of them will be destroyed, how will they be destroyed? Will they be murdered for failing in a particular task? Will they be betrayed and sent on a mission in which they are guaranteed to die? Or will they be lied to that their services to the revolution are good enough and then simply murdered later on to get them out of the way? In Project Mayhem, Tyler has his recruits branded as human sacrifices because he doesn't actually want to save them. And like with any cult leader, Tyler keeps changing the rules to fit his own agendas and continue to acquire more control over members. He started out with actual rules in the basement fights, and then his personal will became the rule in Project Mayhem. In Rule 20 of the Revolutionary Catechism, a final statement is made that, quote, a minority will become genuine revolutionaries, end quote. And that's cult mentality right there. The vague promise of eventual acceptance into the highest tier of the new leadership if you become a dedicated slave for long enough first. Without that prospect, a lot of recruits would just leave. Rule 21 describes the final tier of the perceived system, women, and it divides them into three categories. The first two categories are to be used and abused in accordance with the rules that we just explored regarding the rest of the tier system. And the third category claims that women who are completely dedicated to the cause will be treated with reverence by the group. It describes those women as treasures, funny word for an anti-capitalist group. Again, human beings as a cost-analysed resource, much like the personnel departments of corporations. But also I think this rule presents a false promise to female members who read the manifesto, the prospect of being put on a pedestal if they commit themselves to the cause. And funnily, the specific description of women's role in this rule, and limited to this rule, suggests that the majority of members of the revolution are going to be male. The Fight Club also deems the violent revolution as being primarily a male-dominated affair, but Tyler's group appears to have no relationship with women at all. Remember, in some of the earlier clauses of the Revolutionary Catechism, relationships are deemed inappropriate distractions. So essentially, the emotional separation between the sexes is part of this manifesto, and yet in Rule 21, women are deemed the most valuable resource. This is mirrored by the split personality protagonist of Fight Club, who can't make his mind up whether to have a loving relationship or just use women for sex. Alright, so now we get to the final section of the Revolutionary Catechism, a section headed, The Attitude of the Society Toward the People. By society, they refer to the violent revolutionary movement itself. Now, these 5 final rules are basically statements of purpose, and they are full of contradiction and hypocrisy, just like everything else we've explored. Rule 22 claims the aim is the complete liberation and happiness of the people. Liberation? Yet, in Rule 19, the manifesto described how liberals of various shades of opinion should be falsely collaborated with and used by the revolutionaries. As for wanting the happiness of the people, well, Rule 13 in the same manifesto claimed that the members shouldn't have any sympathy for this world, and that, quote, he should not hesitate to destroy any position, any place, or any man in this world. He must hate everyone and everything in it with an equal hatred, end quote. So we've got the total opposite statements being made there. Rule 22 even contradicts itself by claiming to want liberation and happiness for the people, and then stating that motivating the revolution must be achieved by, quote, increasing and intensifying the evils and miseries of the people until at last their patience is exhausted and they are driven to a general uprising, end quote. It's an indirect admission that the evils and miseries of the existing system aren't as bad as the revolutionaries want them to be perceived. Just like in Fight Club, an office job can feel mundane or even like slavery at times when it's at its worst, but it's nothing compared to real slavery. And all those materialist consumption adverts that Tyler objects to, we can just ignore them and not buy the products. We don't have to go on a massive destructive campaign. Advertising campaigns can and do often fail because the consumer has the choice to say, no, I don't want it. Junk food ruining your health, Tyler complains about this. Well then just use your freedom of choice and start eating healthier stuff. You don't have to tear down the system to sort that out. Tyler's overreactive view is an exaggeration, as if we are literally forced to take the jobs that we don't want, eat the foods that are bad for us, or buy whatever is advertised to us. The Revolutionary Catechism wants to make the masses suffer to motivate mass revolt, and Tyler persuades his people that they are suffering more than they actually are to motivate mass revolt. Rule 23 is basically a call for anarchism. The author claims that the revolutionary group don't want to simply replace the government with a new one, thus continuing the cycle of the power reins being handed from one autocracy to another. He claims that the aim is to not have a government at all. But if that were the case, then who would decide afterwards which members of the previous system are to be executed, and who would carry out those executions? The organisation of this extermination activity would inevitably require in itself a new authoritarian hierarchy. Rule 24 in the Catechism basically passes the buck with regards to how any future society should be organised. It says, quote, this is a matter for future generations to decide, end quote. Well, what if the suffering and misery caused by the revolution was so bad that the people then cry out for something similar to the old system to be put back in place? It would defeat the point of the revolution having occurred to begin with. In a nutshell, the author simply doesn't know the specifics of how the replacement system should work so that it would be all fair and nice and utopian, and so he stupidly claims that there should be no system at all. The psychotic purpose is bluntly stated in the final line of this clause. Quote, our task is terrible, total, universal and merciless destruction, end quote. In parallel with this, destruction is Tyler's solution too.
Self-improvement is masturbation. Now self-destruction.
Rule 25 is context-specific about who to unite in the revolutionary cause in Russia, but there's a statement later in this clause that reveals an extermination mindset that's similar to the Nazis who perceived certain races as parasites. The author here describes the kulaks as parasitic. The kulaks weren't even rich. They were farmland owners who employed people at the local level. The bigoted view of these people, which is present in this manifesto, eventually resulted in millions being enslaved and executed under Stalin approximately 50 years after this revolutionary catechism was first published. Read up on dekulakization and classicide, which is a variation on genocide. In Fight Club, the group who are specified as worthy of targeting as if they are vermin is basically boardroom businessmen who wear suits. It isn't stated openly that these people would be targeted for violence and persecution, but under Tyler's system they undoubtedly would be, and it is shown here. And it would be based on Tyler's simplistic group identity assessment that boardroom business people are inherently bad. Yes, massive corruption can occur in boardrooms and we do need more exposure of this, but I would say it's more often due to bad mistakes than conspiracy, although conspiracies certainly do happen in boardrooms. And some boardrooms make decisions that do a lot more good for society than bad. Even revolutionary movements themselves have leadership boardroom equivalents. And just because they don't wear business suits doesn't make them any less corrupt. And on to Rule 26, the final one, which is an open admission of not just being murderous, but persuading the masses to be murderous too. Quote, to weld the people into one single unconquerable and all-destructive force. Wow. The author even describes their activities and aim as a conspiracy. So that's the entire 26 rules, and it's pretty ridiculous, isn't it? But unfortunately, entire violent revolutions in the real world have been driven time and time again by such flawed manifesto logic, because not enough people pay attention to the specific language of such rhetoric. Breaking down and cross-referencing the ideological language reveals the contradictions, the hypocrisies, the utopian unrealism, and often vengeful jealousy as a motivating force. But also the gaps can be revealing. What is not clearly defined in a manifesto or not said at all can often result in perceptual grey areas where the most brutal and destructive acts can thrive. In both the Revolutionary Catechism and Tyler's Fight Club, there appears to be no specific rules that limit the behaviour of the revolutionary fighter. There's nothing about, let's say, rape or child murder being off limits as behaviours. Nothing about ethics or morality. All that stuff is disregarded or simply not mentioned, just like in the mind of the self-interested psychopath. Overall, the parallels between this document and Tyler's Revolution are so uncanny that it wouldn't surprise me if author Chuck Palahniuk had read some version of the Revolutionary Catechism before writing Fight Club. I certainly believe the Fight Club was written with some conscious awareness of these ideological contradictions, and that those contradictions were intentionally worked into the story for our education. Well, thanks for listening, folks. I hope you enjoyed this. You've been listening to Rob Ager. I am going to be producing more videos on Fight Club because there's plenty more to say about this movie, but most of those videos are going to be sale items on my website. So be sure to go and check out these sale items on a regular basis there. Hopefully in the next couple of weeks I'll have a couple of Fight Club videos available as digital downloads. You can also follow me on Twitter and Facebook for updates, and you can support me on Patreon for access to more content. All those links are in the video description below. Take it easy, folks.